The morning it happened, I was standing at the curb outside Dallas Love Field, with my carry-on balanced against my shin. It was already hot, the kind of Texas July heat that sticks to the back of your neck and makes the pavement smell faintly metallic. Cars were pulling in and out in short, impatient bursts. Luggage wheels rattled over concrete seams. A plane lifted overhead, low and loud. We were supposed to be flying to Denver, a celebration trip, my mother had called it. My younger sister, Claire, had just gotten promoted at her firm. My father said it would be good for family optics. I remember adjusting the strap on my bag and checking my phone battery. 82%, plenty. My mother, Diane, leaned across the passenger seat from the front. Her sunglasses were large and reflective. I could see myself in them, small, distorted. "We couldn't check the big one," she said lightly. "It's such a hassle. This is easier." She handed me an envelope. Inside was a bus ticket. One way. There was also a folded card. "Congratulations," it read in neat script. Inside, a crisp $100 bill. My father, Mark, kept both hands on the steering wheel. He didn't turn around. He didn't say my name. He just nodded once, as if we had completed a transaction. Claire was in the back seat scrolling on her phone. She didn't look up. I waited for someone to explain the joke. No one did. The engine idled. Then the car eased forward. The door shut with a soft, final click. I stood there holding the envelope while the car merged back into traffic and disappeared around the curve toward departures. I didn't cry. I didn't call after them. I watched until the red brake lights were just two small dots and then nothing. I picked a bus that was boarding and handed over the ticket. I didn't know then that 3 years later I would be walking into a ballroom where my mother would pretend she had discovered me. But that part came later. The bus dropped me in South Dallas near a row of older storefronts I'd only ever seen from the highway. My suitcase felt heavier than it had at the airport. My phone screen looked dark and useless in the afternoon glare. The $100 in my pocket felt less like help and more like a countdown. I found a room for rent above a bar called the Tin Lantern. The sign flickered even in daylight. The landlord was a tired man with nicotine-stained fingers who asked for cash and didn't ask questions. The room had one narrow bed, a dresser with a missing handle, and a window that faced a brick wall. The carpet felt damp even when it wasn't. At night, music from downstairs didn't shake the building. It settled into it. The bass became part of the air. It had a door that locked. That mattered. I opened a small spiral notebook I'd carried in my backpack since high school. I've always been the kind of person who draws when words feel unreliable. On the first page in that room, I wrote 2 words in plain block letters: Survival Fund. I slid $80 into an envelope and placed it in the back of the dresser drawer. Then I made a schedule. 4 a.m. alarm, coffee shop barista, noon to 5, hotel housekeeping, 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., dishwasher at a wholesale bakery. The first morning, the alarm tone felt sharp in the dark. I washed my face in a sink that dripped constantly and walked to the bus stop before the sun rose. The air smelled like fryer oil and damp asphalt. At the coffee shop, I learned to steam milk until it made that soft, tearing sound just before it turned silky. I learned to keep my voice steady. "Have a good one," I'd say, even when people didn't look at me. By noon, I was changing sheets in hotel rooms where strangers had slept deeply. The air smelled like industrial cleaner and leftover perfume. I folded towels with sharp corners and kept my head down. At night, in the bakery, I scraped burnt sugar off sheet pans until my hands stung. The smell there was thick: yeast, flour dust, bleach. The head baker, a broad-shouldered man named Ron, moved quietly. He handled dough with a kind of respect. He never spoke more than necessary. I was the dishwasher. I stayed in my lane. When I returned to my room around 2:30 a.m., the bar downstairs would be closing. The sudden quiet felt heavier than the noise. Some nights I scrolled through old contacts, my mother, my sister. I typed, "I'm fine," then deleted it. I typed, "Why?" then deleted that too. Eventually, the tears stopped. Not because I was stronger, just because I was tired. Instead of writing, I started drawing again. 3-tier cakes with delicate sugar flowers, flavors I'd never tasted, blood orange and thyme, honey and pistachio, thin lace patterns made of icing so fragile they would snap if you breathed too hard. I sketched them in a room that smelled like stale beer and disinfectant. Drawing was quiet. It didn't argue with me. One morning, during a lull at the coffee shop, I was sketching a cake on the back of a receipt when a voice across the counter said, "That looks expensive." I looked up. It was a coworker. Her name was Lena. Short dark hair pulled into a low bun, a small tattoo of a paper airplane on her wrist. "You draw a lot," she said, sliding onto the stool near the register. "You good?" "Just passing time," I told her. She leaned closer to the page. "That's not passing time. That's planning something." She took a photo of the sketch without asking. "My cousin runs events," she said casually. "He'd lose his mind over this." I shrugged. It felt easier than hoping, but she kept talking to me, brought me half her breakfast sandwich, covered the register when I ran 5 minutes late from the hotel job. She looked at me like I was visible. A few weeks later, Ron found my notebook in the bakery. It had fallen open to a detailed drawing of a sugar peony with support dowels mapped underneath. He stood there for a long moment, flour dusted on his forearms. "You draw this?" he asked. I nodded. He didn't smile. He didn't praise. He just tapped the page once. "Structure's wrong," he said. "That top tier would collapse." Then he looked around the empty kitchen. "My ovens are off between midnight and 4, he said. "You're already here." He wiped his hands on his apron. "You make a mess, you clean it. You break something, you pay for it. Use the scraps." I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Okay." That night, after the dish racks were stacked and the floor was mopped, I stayed. The industrial lights hummed. The building felt different without customers. I stood in front of the steel table and placed my notebook beside a small bowl of leftover buttercream. Then I picked up a piping bag, and I began. I didn't know yet that one photograph, taken months later, would land on my mother's desk in a glossy packet labeled Brand Opportunity. But that part hadn't arrived. Not yet. Then I focused on the buttercream and steady hands. The first night I tried to pipe a rose, it looked like a folded napkin. Too stiff. Too thick. The petals cracked at the edges. I scraped it off and started again. The bakery at 2:15 a.m. had its own kind of silence. The refrigerators hummed steadily. The metal tables held onto the day's warmth. Flour dust floated in the air, visible only when it crossed the fluorescent lights. Ron didn't hover. He worked on invoices in the small office near the back. Occasionally he would walk past, glance at what I was doing, and adjust something without ceremony. "Angle," he'd say, shifting my wrist half an inch. Or, "Too much pressure." Then he would walk away. No praise, no speeches, just correction. It suited me. I added a 4th block to my schedule, 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. practice. Sleep became something I negotiated with instead of something I had. I learned how to temper chocolate without streaks. I learned that sugar has moods, that buttercream listens to temperature, that structure matters more than decoration. My hands were already rough from bleach. Now they carried faint sugar burns, too. During the day, nothing about my life looked different. I still steamed milk. I still folded towels. I still scrubbed sheet pans. But at night, in those 2 hours, I wasn't invisible. Lena noticed first. One morning she held up her phone and said, "You've got to see this." It was a photo she'd taken weeks earlier of one of my sketches. She'd posted it with no context, just, "My coworker designs cakes like this during slow shifts." Someone had commented asking if I took orders. I told her to ignore it. She didn't. 2 days later, she forwarded me an email, a small anniversary party, 30 guests. The client wanted something elegant but not flashy. Budget, $250. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. That was more than a week of housekeeping shifts. I don't have a kitchen, I said quietly. You literally work in one, Lena replied. So I said yes. For 3 nights, I worked after hours in Ron's bakery. I used scrap ingredients and paid him for what I couldn't. I calculated everything down to ounces and minutes. I delivered the cake in the back seat of a rideshare, holding the box steady on my lap like it was glass. The event planner handed me an envelope at the door. Cash. Exact amount. No negotiation, no pity, just payment. I walked outside into warm evening air and stood on the sidewalk for a minute before opening the envelope. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I simply folded the money and placed it in my bag. Back in my room above the tin lantern, I opened my notebook to a fresh page. I wrote a name at the top, Stone and Sugar. It wasn't a company. It was a placeholder, a possibility. Orders didn't flood in overnight. They arrived slowly. A baby shower, a retirement party, a small office event. I kept everything organized in a basic spreadsheet on my phone. Date, client, deposit, cost of materials, net. I tracked it the way my father used to track expenses at the dinner table, calculator in hand. After 6 months, the numbers made sense. I reduced my housekeeping shifts first, then the coffee shop hours. Eventually, I rented time in a shared commercial kitchen across town. It was small, clean, and brightly lit. No flickering bar sign below it. No damp carpet. When I told Ron I was leaving, he nodded once. About time, he said. You were using too much of my flour. It was the closest thing to encouragement he'd ever offered. Around that same time, a man named Aaron walked into the shared kitchen during a tasting. He introduced himself as a local food blogger. Dallas Table. He didn't rush. He asked about the flavors, about how I balanced acidity in citrus fillings, about how I calculated internal support for tiered designs. You design like you're building something permanent, he said, looking at my sketches pinned to the wall. I design so it won't collapse, I answered. He asked if he could film. Just your hands, he clarified. People like seeing process. I hesitated. Attention still felt dangerous. But I agreed. He filmed quietly for an afternoon. Close shots of icing smoothing under a spatula. Steam rising from freshly baked layers. My notebook open beside a scale. The video went up the following week. It didn't explode. It didn't go viral. It just traveled. A few thousand views. Then more. I noticed because my inbox, which usually held 2 or 3 inquiries a day, held 20, then 50, then 100. Some were serious, some were not. I responded to each one methodically. Deposit required, contract attached, pickup window specified. I learned quickly that clarity protects you. 3 years had passed since the airport curb. I hadn't spoken to my parents. They hadn't spoken to me. There had been no texts, no accidental run-ins. We lived in the same city. It's possible to be very close to someone and still not exist to them. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Subject line, Partnership Opportunity, Stone and Sugar. I almost ignored it, but the sender's name caught my attention. Melissa Grant. The last name settled heavily in my chest. Grant was my mother's maiden name. It was also the name of the PR firm she'd spent her career building. I opened the message slowly. We've been following your recent coverage and would love to explore a potential collaboration, it read. Polished, professional, efficient. Attached was a PDF invitation to an annual charity gala hosted by Grant Public Relations. On the committee list, Diane Grant, my mother. Below that, Claire Grant, my sister. I sat very still in the kitchen office chair, the refrigerator compressor humming steadily behind me. 3 years of silence, and now this. Not a message asking how I was, not a question about where I'd been, an opportunity. I read the email twice, then I put the phone face down on the stainless steel table, and I waited. I didn't respond to the email that day, or the next. Instead, I opened a new tab and searched the gala. Grant Public Relations Annual Community Impact Evening. Black tie, downtown hotel ballroom, corporate sponsors listed in neat rows. I downloaded the PDF invitation and read it carefully. Date, time, sponsorship tiers, donation structure, press partners. Then I checked my order calendar. I was booked that weekend, 3 pickups scheduled, 2 deposits already cleared. I closed the browser and opened my accounting file. Revenue year 1, modest. Year 2, stable. Year 3, significantly higher. I ran totals for the last 12 months. Net profit after kitchen rental, supplies, utilities, taxes. The number was steady, sustainable. I printed the summary and placed it in a folder labeled 2023, closed. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I needed to see it on paper. Power, I was learning, isn't loud, it's documented. The next morning, another email came from Melissa, just circling back. No personal note, no acknowledgement of the past. I replied with 3 sentences. Thank you for reaching out. Please clarify the scope of the proposed collaboration. What deliverables are expected, and what is the compensation structure? Her response arrived within the hour. They wanted me to provide a signature cake for the gala. In exchange, they would offer exposure to high-net-worth attendees and media coverage. No payment mentioned. I read the email twice, then I drafted a proposal. Line item, custom design consultation. Line item, ingredient sourcing. Line item, production hours. Line item, delivery and setup. Total, $8,750. Deposit required, 50%. Balance due, 48 hours before event. I attached a simple contract. Then I waited. Silence lasted 2 days. On the 3rd, a new email appeared. This one from my mother's assistant. Diane would like to speak with you directly. I set my phone down. I made tea. Chamomile. Let it steep fully. Then I scheduled the call. When my mother's voice came through the speaker, it sounded the same. Smooth. Controlled. Olivia, she said. It's been a long time. Yes, I replied. A pause. We're very proud of what you've built, she continued. The coverage has been impressive. I didn't answer that. We thought this gala could be meaningful, a way to reconnect. I looked at the contract open on my laptop. The proposal outlines my terms, I said. If the firm would like to proceed, the deposit will secure the date. Another pause. Longer this time. You're charging us? She asked lightly. I'm charging the host organization, I clarified. A faint exhale on the other end. This is a charitable event, she said. I understand, I replied. My business is not a charity. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was evaluative. We'll review the numbers, she said finally. The call ended politely. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. Step 1, define value. Step 2, document terms. Step 3, wait. By the end of the week, the deposit cleared. $4,375. Wire transfer. No note attached. I updated the spreadsheet, marked the date, saved the confirmation. Then I began designing. I didn't create something extravagant. I created something structured. 5 tiers. Clean lines, white fondant with subtle textured panels, handcrafted sugar florals in muted ivory and pale gold. Internal support measured precisely. Dowels cut to exact height. I kept the design sketches in a separate folder. Not sentimental, just organized. 2 days before the event, the balance cleared. No negotiation, no commentary. I printed the final invoice and placed it in my records binder. The morning of the gala, I loaded the tiers into my delivery van, each secured in its own box. The air was cool, the sky was clear. I checked my list. Cake tiers, tools, repair kit, contract copy, invoice copy. I wore a simple black dress under my chef coat. Not dramatic, just clean. When I arrived at the hotel ballroom, staff were already moving in coordinated lines. White linens stretched over round tables, glassware aligned precisely. A young event coordinator approached with a clipboard. "Stone and sugar?" she asked. "Yes." She led me to the center of the room where a pedestal table waited. As I assembled the cake, I could feel eyes occasionally drifting in my direction. Not recognition, assessment. That was fine. I worked quietly, checked alignment, smoothed seams, placed the final sugar flour. When I stepped back, the structure held, solid, complete. I removed my chef coat, and then I waited for the doors to open. The doors opened at 6. Guests entered in measured waves. Dark suits, formal dresses, low conversation layered over soft instrumental music. Glasses clinked lightly. The air carried perfume and the faint scent of polished wood. I stood near the cake table for the first 15 minutes, answering quiet questions from hotel staff about slicing instructions and stability. Then I stepped away. I didn't approach my family. I let the room settle first. Across the ballroom, I saw them. My mother stood near the stage, one hand lightly touching the elbow of a sponsor. My sister stood beside her, posture straight, smile practiced. My father held a drink and scanned the room the way he always had, evaluating. They didn't see me immediately. I took a glass of water from a passing tray and stood near the back wall. Silence can be active. I watched the flow of the event. Welcome remarks, sponsor acknowledgements, projected slides about community outreach. When the cake was mentioned during the host's speech, there was polite applause. "Crafted by a remarkable local entrepreneur," the MC said. "A true story of resilience. No name yet, just positioning." I listened carefully. After the speech, guests moved toward the center display, phones lifted, photos taken. My mother noticed the crowd gathering and approached the cake table with a sponsor in tow. She smiled broadly. "That's our featured piece," she said. The sponsor asked who designed it. My mother opened her mouth. I stepped forward. "I did," I said. Her expression shifted for a fraction of a second, then it reset. "Of course," she said smoothly. "This is my daughter." The sponsor looked between us. "How impressive," he said. I extended my hand. "Olivia Bennett," I said, "owner of Stone and Sugar." My mother's smile tightened slightly at the surname. I had legally changed it 2 years earlier, quietly, filed paperwork, paid the fee, updated licenses and accounts. Step 1, secure identity. Step 2, formalize separation. Step 3, build under your own name. The sponsor asked about structural integrity for 5 tiers. I explained the dowel system, the baseboard thickness, the distribution of weight. He nodded appreciatively. My sister moved closer. "You look different," she said softly. "Time does that," I replied. She glanced at the crowd. "Mom didn't know you'd be so visible." I met her eyes calmly. "The contract included a credit line," I said. "It's printed on the menu cards." Her gaze flicked to the tables. Each menu included dessert by Stone and Sugar, Olivia Bennett. Clear, unmissable, not a surprise, just documented. My mother leaned closer, lowering her voice. "We could have handled this privately," she said. "I responded to the email professionally," I answered. "This wasn't meant to be transactional." "Everything is transactional," I said evenly. "You taught me that." She inhaled slowly. "We invited you to reconnect." "You wired a deposit," I said. "That's not reconnection, that's procurement." The words settled between us. Nearby, the event photographer approached. "Family photo?" he asked. My mother turned toward him automatically. I stepped slightly aside. "I'm here in a vendor capacity," I said. "Photos should reflect the host organization." The photographer hesitated, then nodded and stepped back. Control doesn't require volume, it requires boundaries. Later, during dessert service, I stood beside the catering manager as the cake was sliced. Clean cuts, even portions, no collapse. Guests complimented the flavor profile, the balance of citrus and almond. I thanked them politely. My father approached quietly when the line thinned. "You've done well?" he said. "Yes," I replied. He shifted his weight. "You could have called." "I did," I said calmly. 3 years ago. The number was disconnected." He looked down at the floor for a moment. "That was a difficult period," he said. "For me as well," I answered. He didn't argue that. Instead, he nodded once. "If you'd like to discuss things," he began. "I prefer written communication," I said. "It creates clarity." He studied me as if recalibrating. "Of course," he said finally. Across the room, I noticed Melissa, the PR manager, speaking animatedly to a group near the stage. She gestured toward the cake, then toward me. Opportunity framed as narrative. I walked over. She turned with a bright smile. "There she is," she said. "The story everyone loves." "I'm not a story," I said gently. "I'm a vendor." Her smile faltered slightly. "We were thinking of featuring you in our quarterly spotlight," she continued. "Your journey is so compelling." "I'm open to paid collaborations," I replied. "Standard rates apply." The group around her fell quiet. "Of course," she said quickly. "We can discuss details." "I'll have my assistant send a media kit," I said. I didn't mention that my assistant was a part-time college student who handled emails on Tuesdays. Perception fills gaps. As the evening wound down, I checked in with the catering manager, confirmed all equipment was returned, and collected my signed completion form. Documentation matters. I walked toward the exit. My mother followed. "Is this how it's going to be?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I said. "No anger?" "No." "No forgiveness?" "That's separate from access," I replied. She looked at me for a long moment. "You've changed." "Yes," I said again. Outside, the air was cooler than earlier. I placed the signed form in my folder, slid into the driver's seat of my van, and closed the door. Then I waited a moment before starting the engine. I didn't start the engine right away. I sat with both hands resting on the steering wheel and watched the hotel entrance through the windshield. Valets moved with quiet efficiency. Guests stepped into waiting cars. Laughter carried briefly, then faded as doors shut. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. It was my mother. "You left quickly," she said. "My work was complete," I replied. Another pause. "There are things we need to discuss," she continued. Her voice had shifted. Less polished, more direct. "I agree," I said. "Written communication works best." "This isn't a legal matter," she said, a slight edge beneath the calm. "I prefer clarity," I answered. Silence. "I didn't handle that day well," she said finally. "The airport." She hadn't said the word. She didn't need to. "I know," I said. "You were difficult at the time," she added, almost reflexively. I let that settle. "Difficult," I repeated, not arguing, not agreeing, just placing the word in the air. "You refused the internship," she said. "You refused to relocate. You wouldn't follow the plan." "I chose differently," I replied. "It embarrassed us," she said quietly. There it was. Not concern, not fear for my safety, embarrassment. "I understand," I said. "Image has always been important to you." She exhaled slowly. "We thought you needed to learn responsibility." "At the airport?" I asked calmly. A long pause. "We assumed you would come back," she said. "I didn't," I answered. That was the first moment her composure slipped. "You disappeared," she said. "I sent 2 emails with my new address," I replied. Both bounced back. Silence again, this time heavier. "I didn't know that," she said. "I know," I answered. The truth didn't need volume, it just needed sequence. Step 1, I was left at the curb with a bus ticket. Step 2, I secured housing and employment. Step 3, I attempted contact. Step 4, no response. Step 5, I built independently. It wasn't emotional. It was chronological. I'm not calling to argue, she said after a moment. The firm would like to formalize a longer partnership. I appreciate the offer, I replied. Please have your team send a detailed proposal. And personally? She pressed. I don't mix personal and contractual matters, I said. She was quiet long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, softer than before, You don't need to be so guarded. I'm not guarded, I said. I'm structured. That ended the conversation. I placed the phone face down. Then I started the engine. The drive back to my kitchen was steady. Streetlights passed in even intervals. Traffic was light. When I unlocked the kitchen door, the room smelled faintly of vanilla and cleaning solution. Stainless steel reflected the overhead lights. Everything was in order. I placed the signed completion form in my filing cabinet. Then I opened my ledger and recorded the final payment as cleared. Business closed. The following week, a formal proposal arrived from Grant Public Relations. It included projected exposure metrics, brand alignment language, and a suggested long-term ambassadorship. Compensation was listed, lower than my standard rate. I reviewed it carefully. Then I sent a counter-proposal. Revised fee structure, defined deliverables, term limits, usage rights clearly outlined. 2 days later, they accepted. No personal note attached. Contracts were signed electronically. Funds transferred on schedule. I delivered 2 additional commissioned pieces over the next quarter. Each transaction documented, each invoice archived. During the second event, my sister approached me privately. I didn't think you'd actually negotiate, she said. I don't work for free, I replied. She studied me. Mom thought you'd be grateful, she admitted. For what? I asked evenly. She didn't answer that. Instead, she said, You look stable. I am, I said. She nodded slowly. For the first time in years, there was no tension in my chest when standing near her. Not because anything had been repaired, but because nothing was owed. Later that evening, I overheard Melissa speaking with a sponsor. She's very professional, Melissa said. Clear boundaries, easy to work with. It wasn't meant for me to hear, but I did. Control doesn't always feel powerful in the moment. Sometimes it just feels quiet. That night, after returning to the kitchen and locking up, I sat at my desk and opened a folder labeled Personal. Inside were 3 documents: the bus ticket receipt I'd kept, the legal name change confirmation, the original lease agreement for the room above the tin lantern. I didn't read them for long. I just confirmed they were there, records of origin. Then I closed the folder and returned it to the drawer. I turned off the lights, and I went home. 3 weeks after the second event, an email arrived that didn't come from my mother. It came from the hotel group that had hosted the gala. Subject line, Vendor Reference Inquiry. They were planning a regional hospitality conference and were requesting preferred dessert partners. My name had been recommended by multiple sponsors from the charity event. I replied with my standard media kit, pricing sheet, and availability calendar. 2 days later, a contract followed. This one was larger, multi-day, structured payments, clear deliverables, full deposit required. I reviewed it line by line, no ambiguity. The deposit cleared within 48 hours. I added a new tab to my accounting file labeled Conference Series, Q3. Projected revenue exceeded my previous quarter by nearly 40%. Not dramatic, not sudden, just measurable. A week later, I received a certified letter from Grant Public Relations. I signed for it at the kitchen door. Inside was a formal amendment request to expand our partnership into the following fiscal year. Increased compensation, broader media rights, a clause offering joint press features highlighting family entrepreneurship. I read that line twice. Then I placed the letter flat on my desk. Joint narrative. I opened a blank document and typed a response. Stone and Sugar operates as an independent entity. Media features may reference my professional history but will not include familial branding or representation. Clear, polite, final. I attached a revised contract with that clause removed. 2 days later, it was signed without edits. No commentary attached. That was the moment I understood something fully. The leverage had never been emotional. It was structural. Contracts, deliverables, payment schedules, documentation. When those are clear, emotion has nowhere to hide. A month after that, my father requested a meeting. Not at an event, not at a ballroom, at a neutral place. A small cafe near my kitchen. I agreed to 30 minutes. He arrived early. No suit jacket this time. Just a button-down shirt. He looked older than I remembered. We ordered coffee. He didn't touch his. "I've been reviewing some old accounts," he began. He placed a thin folder on the table and slid it toward me. Inside were copies of the internal firm emails from 3 years ago, the day of the airport. There it was in writing. Olivia refusing compliance. Remove financial access. Discontinue phone line support. Allow consequence to prompt return. Typed. Time-stamped. Corporate language applied to a daughter. I didn't react. I read the sequence carefully. Step 1. Cut financial access. Step 2. Remove phone support. Step 3. Assume return. Assumption had been part of the plan. "You were meant to come back within a week," he said quietly. "I didn't," I replied. He nodded. "I miscalculated." That was as close to an apology as he could manage. "I've separated from the firm," he added. I looked up. He slid another document across the table. Resignation letter. Effective date confirmed. "I didn't agree with how things were handled," he said. "You signed off," I answered. "Yes," he said. Silence settled between us. "I'm not asking you to forget," he continued. "I'm asking if we can establish terms." It was an interesting choice of word. "Personal terms?" I asked. "Yes." I considered it. "Communication in writing," I said. "No financial entanglement, no public narrative without consent, respect for my name and business autonomy." He nodded. "That's reasonable." "It's structured," I replied. He almost smiled at that. We didn't hug. We didn't linger. We signed nothing. But clarity had been established. Later that week, the hospitality conference went smoothly. My team, now 3 part-time assistants, executed on schedule. All invoices cleared on time. Local press mentioned Stone and Sugar by name. Only my name, no qualifiers. Revenue closed the quarter at its highest point since launch. I updated the ledger. Then I archived the year. That night, in the quiet of the kitchen, I opened the old folder again. The bus ticket. The lease. The name change confirmation. I added one more document. The signed hospitality conference contract. Origin, separation, growth, order. I closed the folder and returned it to the drawer. Then I turned off the lights. This morning, I was in the kitchen before sunrise. Not the commercial one. My own. The windows were open just slightly. Early air moving through quietly. The house was still. I set water to boil and wiped down the counter out of habit. Even though it was already clean, I don't rush mornings anymore. I make tea. I review the day's production list. I check the calendar. There's comfort in repetition. The shop opens at 9 now. We have a small storefront attached to the kitchen. Nothing flashy. White tile, warm lighting, glass display case, Stone and Sugar in simple lettering above the door. Customers come in for birthdays, weddings, graduations. They don't know the airport story unless they've searched for it. And even then, it's a footnote in an article about entrepreneurship. That's fine. A few months ago, my mother attended the shop opening. She stood near the back. No speech, no sponsor banner. Just a guest. She brought a small plant, left it on the counter with a handwritten card. "Congratulations on your opening." No logo, no firm name, just her signature. We've had coffee twice since then. Public places, scheduled in advance. There are still boundaries. They're not dramatic. They're simply maintained. My father sends short emails every few weeks. updates about his consulting work, articles he thinks I'd find interesting. No advice, no corrections. My sister and I speak occasionally, carefully. It's quieter between us now, less performance. None of it is perfect, but it's orderly. I've learned that survival isn't loud, it's procedural. You secure housing, you secure income, you secure identity, you document everything. And when the opportunity comes back around wearing a polite smile, you don't argue with it. You invoice it. There are still days when I drive past Love Field, not on purpose, just on the way to supplier pickups. The curb looks smaller than I remember. The heat still rises from the pavement in summer. I don't feel anger when I see it, just perspective. Sometimes young employees come into the shop asking about internships. One of them, last month, mentioned that her parents cut her off after she changed majors. She said it quietly, like it was something she should apologize for. I handed her an apron and showed her how to level cake layers properly. We talked about schedules, not stories. People don't always need advice. Sometimes they just need structure. The kettle whistles softly now. I pour the water over chamomile and watch the steam rise. There's flour on the counter, a delivery scheduled at noon, an order form waiting for confirmation. I put the phone face down. Then I sit at the table and take a slow sip of tea. If you've been listening this far, thank you for being here with me. If this story resonated with you, go ahead and like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your city right now. Leave it in the comments. I read more of them than you might think. 2 other stories that people really connected with will appear on your screen in a moment. Until then, take care of your own structure.